Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. After 5 long years we are starting back up again and hopefully you're going to be seeing my face a lot more. Now we're still going to be going down the direction of how we went last time, so I'm going to be following on from my last video and starting true crime up again. Today we are going to be talking about a 12-year-old little girl who was savagely murdered purely for who she was dating. This case does have a lot of coverage online. It's been spoken about in lots of different websites, different articles, and even was on Dr. Phil. That does mean that even though I have tried my absolute best to get the most accurate and up-to-date information, the way I have pieced it together may not be completely accurate to how it happened. But my main aim with these videos is to give the victims as much justice as I can and to spread as much awareness as I can as well for the families that may still be grieving, and especially for the victim. So, to get into the case, Shanda Sharerer was born on the 6th of June 1979 to parents Stephen and Jacqueline, and she was raised in Kentucky. At some point in her childhood, her parents did actually divorce, and this is when Shanda's mother Jacqueline moved the family to Louisville, and Shanda obviously switched schools. She joined St. Paul's School, where she attended 5th and 6th grade there, and there she did like volleyball, softball, even joined the cheerleading team. However, her mother did get a divorce again, and in 1991 she moved the family again to New Albany in Indiana, and this is where Shanda joined Hazelwood Middle School. It was at this school, early in the fall semester, Shanda was 12 years old at this point, and she met a classmate named Amanda Hervin. I'm not sure at this point if Amanda was 14 or 15, however there was a 2 to 3 year age gap between the two girls. At some point when they both met at this school, Amanda and Shanda did have an altercation which led them both to go to detention together, and it was in this detention that they both became friends and they later exchanged romantic letters. Amanda and Shanda did begin a sexual relationship together in which they would obviously spend a lot of time with each other. One of these times that they were together, they did attend a school dance, and it was at this school dance where they ran into the 16-year-old Melinda Lovelace. Melinda Lovelace was a previous ex-partner of Amanda Hervin, and the pair had started dating in 1990. However, as that year progressed, it was reported that their relationship had deteriorated a little bit, but actually despite this, they never broke up. They just both decided to get new partners. But when Melinda saw the pair of them together, this left her feeling extremely jealous of the two. So after this, the next piece of information I could find was that in late October, Amanda and Shanda, they were still continuing their relationship where they attended a festival. It was reported that at this point, this is when Melinda started discussing wanting to murder Shanda, and she even threatened her publicly. Amanda even received multiple letters herself from Melinda, where Melinda said that she wanted to kill Shanda, but she didn't seem to really do a lot. She did say in Dr. Phil that she sent them off to youth prosecutors, but apparently they didn't do anything about it. So obviously at this point, Shanda's mother was becoming so worried for her little girl. And ultimately she was so worried for her safety. So she made the decision to take Shanda out of that school and put her into a different school in hopes that it would change the situation and that she would stop getting bullied. However, despite her mother's best efforts, it wasn't enough to prevent what happened later on in this case. So it's going to be at this point now where we are going to be discussing the crimes that happened in this case. The crime happened on the winter night of January 10th, 1992. It was on this day that 16-year-old Melinda Lovelace decided to put her plans into action. She put her threats of wanting to kill 12-year-old Shanda into a plan and recruited 3 friends to help her do it. The 3 friends that she enlisted was 17-year-old Laurie Tackett, 15-year-old Hope Rippey, and 15-year-old Tony Lawrence. Hope and Tony, both the 15-year-olds, didn't even know Melissa prior to what happened in this case. I'm guessing they just thought this was a situation where they was going to scare this 12-year-old girl. I'm not trying to make excuses for them at all, but I'm just thinking that seems to be the only way why somebody would do that if they're not even friends with the ringleader. So at this stage, 17-year-old Laurie did actually already know about the plan to murder Shanda, but like I said, the other girls were apparently unaware. Melinda had just explained to the other two girls that she had a disliking for Shanda and she thought she was a copycat, and she was just mad that she was stealing her girlfriend. And at this point, Melinda showed the two a knife that she had and said that she was just going to scare Shanda with it. They all got in, I believe it was Laurie's car, where Hope drove the car, and she drove the four girls to Jeffersonville, where Shanda was staying at her dad's for the night. So the ringleader, Melinda, instructed the two younger girls, Hope and Tony, to go to the door and introduce themselves as friends of Amanda's. Obviously, if Melinda went up to the door, Shanda would not feel safe at all coming out to her, but because Shanda believed that these two were friends of Amanda, maybe they misused her trust a little bit. So these two girls, like I said, introduced themselves as friends of Amanda's and said that she was waiting for her somewhere called the Witch's Castle. And this was just a ruined stone house. It overlooked the Ohio River. Obviously, Shanda was extremely reluctant to go out. She didn't know these girls, but instead she just told them that she had a party to go to and just to return a little bit later. And that's exactly what the girls did. The four girls were frustrated with this response from Shanda, but obviously they knew they couldn't do much else. If they wanted to put their plan into action, they just had to come back later. So the four of them returned back to Shanda's house at 12:30 a.m. that same night, but it was actually Laurie and Hope that went to the door this time because Tony refused to go. And it was at this point that Shanda's mum and her stepdad had, no, other way around, sorry. Her dad and her stepmum had both gone to bed for the night, and it was just Shanda that was awake at this point. And when she answered the door, she was still extremely reluctant to go out, but she said yeah. She said, "Let me just change my clothes and I'll come with you." So they let Shanda into the car and explained that they was going to the Witch's Castle. And this was just a place, like I described before, it was very isolated. All the local teens would hang out there. So during the drive to the Witch's Castle, Hope began asking questions about Shanda's relationship with Amanda. And it was at this point where Melinda leaped out from the back seat, where she was hiding under a blanket with a knife in her hand. She put the knife to Shanda's throat and began interrogating her about her sexual interest with Amanda. She said to Shanda that she will slit her throat unless Shanda admits what she was doing, and that she had stolen Amanda away from Melinda. And Shanda, obviously a 12-year-old girl, she was in tears at this point. She was very scared, very frightened, and obviously she was just scared for her life. This is the point where Melinda then convinced the girls to drive to a remote location with Shanda, where there would be nobody else around for miles. But the other girls just complied. I'm guessing they just assumed that all she wanted to do was scare Shanda. Maybe scare her into even breaking up with Amanda. But obviously that isn't what happened. So at this point, Shanda was taken to like a trash dump in a really densely forested area where nobody could see anything. And they were obviously as far away from everybody as they could be. It was here where the brutal attack started on Shanda. Melinda and Laurie proceeded to strip Shanda's clothes off of her, and then they started punching her repeatedly. Melinda then kneed Shanda in the mouth, which caused her so much pain, and she started bleeding. And while this was happening, this attack, Hope and Tony were still sat in the car. They were not participating at this point. Melinda and Laurie at this point, they'd just beaten Shanda. That is obviously bad enough, but they were just beating her. But they realised this wasn't enough for them. They wanted to do more. So it was at this point where Melinda took the knife that she had and tried to slit Shanda's throat. However, she realised the knife was too dull. It wasn't going through. So instead of stopping the attack, she stabbed her in the chest. They then proceeded to strangle her with a rope, and obviously at this point Shanda would have been in so much pain. I can't even imagine how this poor 12-year-old girl looked at this point, and she was just thrown in the trunk of the car. And at this point they all thought they'd achieved what they set out to do. They thought that she was dead, so with her in the trunk of the car, they made their way to Laurie's house to clean up from what they'd just done. It was at this point they were acting so casual about what they'd just done. They were just all stood there drinking sodas, and it was at this point they heard screaming coming from the trunk of the car. And obviously it was Shanda. So at this point Laurie went out and she stabbed Shanda a few more times, and then she went with Melissa and drove Shanda again to, I'm guessing, another remote area, and this is where they sexually assaulted her with a tire iron. And I believe at this point they just put her back in the trunk, drove back to Laurie's house, and they described the abuse that they just did to this girl, and they were just laughing about it. So in the early hours of the morning, the girls stopped off at a gas station and they bought a 2-litre bottle of Pepsi, which they quickly drank and then replaced with gasoline. This is where they drove to another remote location and they took Shanda out of the trunk. And like I said, Shanda at this point, she would have been barely clinging on to life. She has been tortured for hours and hours. This poor girl is suffering so much. She'd been beaten, she'd been stabbed, she'd been strangled, and she was still alive. And she was 12 years old. So they then took this little girl out of the trunk, they wrapped her in a blanket, poured gasoline over the blanket, and they lit it on fire while she was still alive. And then they just drove off. However, they did return a few minutes later because they wanted to put more gasoline on her and they wanted to make sure that she was properly dead this time. And this, unfortunately, was where 12-year-old Shanda Sharer lost her life. So straight after killing this 12-year-old girl, the 4 girls went to McDonald's and enjoyed a McDonald's breakfast. And they just started making cruel jokes about Shanda's body. They were eating a sausage sandwich and started describing the sausage sandwich that it looked like Shanda's body, which is such a strange thing to do after you've just murdered a 12-year-old. But this wouldn't last very long, all these cruel jokes and laughing and thinking they've got away with it, because everything would soon be revealed. The same day this actually happened, Melinda went to Amanda and she told her that she had just killed Shanda. Showed her the bloody clothes, showed her the bloody trunk, and Amanda didn't believe her. She didn't think it was real, so she didn't tell anybody about it. However, Hope and Tony actually went to the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office and handed themselves in with their parents and told them everything. So by the next day, they were all taken into custody. So talking about the sentences now that all the girls received. All 4 girls, despite their ages, they were all charged as adults and they had to accept plea bargains in order to avoid the death penalty because of what they did. Hope and Tony, they were younger, they complied with police more, and they were less involved in the crime, so they were the 2 girls that received the lesser sentences. Tony received 20 years and she was released in the year 2000 after only serving 9 years of her sentence. Hope received 50 years, which was then shortened to 35 years, and she actually only ended up serving 14 years in prison, and she was released in 2006. Laurie and Melinda, obviously being more involved in the crime, they both received much higher sentences of 60 years each. Laurie went on to say in an interview, "I didn't know Shanda at all. I didn't go into that even knowing anything was going to happen. Peer pressure, that's all it was. It was something that should never have happened." Laurie was released in January 2018, and I also found out that Melinda as well herself is also a free woman. She had been given early release from prison and was released in 2019. She's been described as a changed person and apparently has shown a lot of remorse for her crimes. So she trains service dogs for disabled people. And while I do think this is absolutely an amazing thing to do, we still can't forget that she murdered a 12-year-old girl in a jealous rage, all because she was jealous that she was dating the same girl that she used to date. and we can't forget that this 12-year-old wasn't given the chance to live out her life as well. Amanda Hervin was never charged with anything linking to the murder, actually. I think this is probably because she wasn't present with the abduction. People are led to believe that she didn't know it was going to happen beforehand, even though she was sent letters and she was told, but she still wasn't linked to the murder. I watched an episode of Dr. Phil that actually featured Amanda, and she said things such as, "I've lost a lot of things. I was even kicked off the basketball team because of it." And things like, "I am getting called a child molester and this is upsetting me." So I guess that's how she feels about the whole thing. So that does conclude the case. This was obviously a very upsetting and very heavy case for me to cover for my first proper true crime case on my channel. But we do have to remember that these are real people that we talk about. They're real families that are grieving, so please do keep everything respectful in the comments section. If you've watched all the way to the end of this video, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to my channel. The engagement really does help my videos. It pushes them out to a greater audience, and we can give these victims more justice and for the story to be heard and to just raise awareness about these types of cases. And it also means that I can create more videos like this and shine a light on victims that have unfortunately lost their lives way too soon and highlight lots of important cases. I appreciate you all so much for listening to me. Thank you for joining me back on my first video in 5 years. Bye.
What a wonderful